The Time Between Us. Chapter 1, The Beginning. Claire Donovan was 17 when she first met Aidan Park. It was the last summer before college, and the sky always seemed to be painted in soft pastels, like the world itself was holding its breath. Claire lived in a small beachside town in Maine, where tourists came and went, but locals stayed forever, unless they had dreams bigger than the shoreline. Aidan was new. He had just moved from Chicago with his father after his parents' bitter divorce. He was quiet, intense, and walked with the weight of something Claire couldn't quite name. She met him at the old bookstore near the docks, where she worked part-time. He asked for a book she had never heard of. "You might be the first person to ever ask me something I couldn't find," she said, half smiling. He looked at her for a moment, then smiled back. "Maybe you weren't looking hard enough." That was how it started. A look. A line. A heartbeat. By August, they were inseparable. They watched meteor showers lying on the sand. He wrote her letters he never gave her, and she made him mixtapes on cassette even though he didn't own a player. They were young. And young love always feels like forever. But forever came too fast. Chapter 2, The Goodbye. On the last day of summer, they sat at the edge of the pier, legs dangling over the ocean. "I got into Berkeley," Claire said quietly. I'm leaving next week. Aiden's face was unreadable. I figured. You always had one foot out of this place. She turned to him. Don't do that. Don't make it small. I'm not. I'm just scared. Of what? He looked at her then, his voice low. Of losing something I finally found. They promised to keep in touch. To write. To call. And for a while, they did. But college is loud, and life is fast, and people change. The calls got shorter. The letters less frequent. Until eventually, there was silence. Chapter 3, 10 years later. Claire was 27, working in a high-rise in New York, with a job that paid well and a calendar that never had empty space. She had everything she thought she wanted: success, travel, independence. But some nights, when the city was quiet, she would pull out a shoebox of memories, ticket stubs, old letters, a seashell Aiden once gave her. Then one morning, while grabbing coffee before a meeting, she heard someone say her name. Claire? She turned around. It was him. Aiden. Older, broader, his hair longer, eyes still the same. Neither of them spoke for a second. The noise of the cafe faded. Wow, she finally said. You look different. He smiled. I could say the same. They sat down. Talked for an hour. Then 2. Then every day for the next 3 weeks. She learned he'd become a teacher. Moved back to Maine. Wrote poetry that he never published. He learned about her job, her broken engagement, and her dream of one day writing a novel. It was as if time had folded, and they were 17 again, but wiser, sadder, realer. Chapter 4, The Choice. One night, after too much wine and a walk through Central Park, Aiden stopped under a street lamp. I still love you, he said simply. I've loved you all this time. In silence. In memory. In every what if I've ever had. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Then why didn't you find me sooner? Because I didn't know if I was still the boy you fell in love with. And I didn't want to show up if I wasn't. She laughed softly. None of us are the people we were. But I think I like who we became. They stood in silence for a moment. Then he reached for her hand. Come home with me, he whispered. She didn't answer that night. But a week later, she handed in her resignation, packed her apartment, and got on a train headed north. Epilogue. They moved slowly at first, lovers reborn, learning each other's edges again. Aiden taught high school literature. Claire wrote her first book, inspired by their story. They lived in a cottage by the sea, where the wind always smelled like salt and hope. Sometimes, when the sun set over the water and the waves kissed the shore, they'd sit on the porch swing, holding hands, saying nothing. Because they had already said everything. And now, they were simply living it. Where the River Meets the Sea. Chapter 1, The Girl with the Camera. Emma Hayes believed in capturing moments, not with words, but through the lens of her vintage Nikon camera. She traveled alone, moving from one town to the next, chasing sunsets, storm clouds, and quiet streets that told stories. But even though her photographs spoke loudly, her heart remained silent, guarded, waiting. It was in a small coastal village in the south of France where everything changed. She arrived in late spring, when the lavender fields were just beginning to bloom, and the air smelled like salt and sun. The village was quiet, lined with pastel cottages and cobblestone alleys that led down to the sea. She was taking photos near the edge of the old harbor when someone walked into her frame, literally. "Sorry," the stranger said, stepping aside. "Didn't mean to ruin your shot." Emma lowered her camera. He had messy brown hair, kind green eyes, and the kind of smile that made her forget what she was doing. "It's okay," she said. "You actually made it better." He chuckled. "I'm Leo." "Emma." They shook hands, and something sparked between their palms, something electric, like the beginning of a story neither of them had expected to write. Chapter 2, A Season of Light. Emma planned to stay in the village for 1 week. She ended up staying the whole summer. Leo was a marine biologist, studying a rare species of coral in the nearby reef. He loved the sea, spoke fluent French with a charming accent, and played guitar at the local cafe on Friday nights. He was calm where she was restless, steady where she was searching. They spent long afternoons walking along the cliffs, evenings sharing wine and stories, nights wrapped in music and laughter. He showed her how to slow down. She showed him how to dream. "I used to think love was supposed to be loud," Emma whispered one night as they lay on the beach, watching the stars. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it's the quiet moments that matter most." He reached over, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then let's make all of ours quiet and real." Chapter 3, The Storm. But love, even in paradise, isn't always simple. In late August, Emma got a call. A famous magazine wanted to feature her work, but she needed to fly to New York immediately. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. "I have to go," she told Leo, tears in her eyes. He didn't beg. Didn't argue. He simply nodded. "Then go. You've always chased the light. Don't stop now." She kissed him goodbye under a sky full of gray clouds. He stood at the dock as her boat pulled away. She looked back, once, twice, then he was gone. Chapter 4, The Distance. In New York, Emma's photographs were everywhere. Galleries, magazines, exhibitions. People praised her for her ability to capture the soul of a place. But no one knew her heart was still back in that village, by the sea. She tried to forget Leo. Tried to fill the silence with work and deadlines and noise. But every storm reminded her of him. Every quiet morning begged for his voice. And no matter where she went, her favorite photo, the one with Leo stepping into her frame, stayed on her nightstand. Chapter 5, Return. A year passed. One morning, Emma woke up and realized she had everything she thought she wanted, except the one thing that made her feel alive. So she booked a flight. When she arrived in the village, it was almost summer again. The lavender was blooming. The sea was calm. She walked to the harbor, heart pounding. He wasn't there. Disappointed but not surprised, she sat down on the old bench where they used to watch the waves. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry her memories. Looking for someone? She opened her eyes. Leo stood before her, older, maybe a little thinner, but still him. She stood up slowly. "I didn't know if you'd be here. I didn't know if you'd come back. I shouldn't have left," she whispered. "No," he said. "You had to leave. And I had to wait. But maybe, now we can begin again." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "No more chasing." "No," he said, taking her hand. "Just staying." Epilogue, Where the River Meets the Sea. Leo never left the village again. She opened a photography studio. He continued his research. They adopted a dog named Lumiere and filled their home with books, candles, and framed moments. Some loves aren't meant to burn fast and bright. Some are meant to stay, to grow, to anchor. And theirs was the kind that stayed forever, where the river meets the sea.